In 3, 2, 1. Stand by.
Are you ready for a change?
I am talking to you.
Then get ready to explore the quantum possibilities. It's time to transform that outdated paradigm into something universal and new. Time to uncover the truth hidden beneath the veil of lies. A time to think outside the box as we link to a higher consciousness. Welcome to the awakening. And now the hosts of Broadcast Team Alpha, Nori Love and Augie Nost.
Oh, welcome to the awakening. How amazing is that? Hello, everybody. It's so good to be here another Tuesday night with you. Before we get into cutting edge conversation tonight, I'd like to invite you to connect with us. You can connect with us at broadcastteamalpha.com, and we asked Santa to increase our subscribership, is that a word? To 5,000 members. So if you are feeling generous, we would love for you to subscribe to our YouTube channel at Broadcast Team Alpha. But right now, I have a giant question for you. What do you think about giants? They seem to lurk largely in mythology and fables and fairy tales. And like there was Orion who left his mark in the stars, and Atlas who holds up the night sky. And in Irish mythology, there's Balor, the one-eyed god of death. And there's Rungar, the drunken Norse giant. And of course, there's the biblical giant, Goliath. And there's Polyphemus, the one-eyed Cyclops, and Oni, the Japanese giant. And I'm not sure if I'm going to say this right, Gangama, the last British giant. And of course, there's Jack and the Beanstalk giant. Right, so these giants are of fantastic stories and myths, but could any of that be real? So as Augie tells us about, and as we welcome our guest, we invite you to consider, what do you think about giants? And do you think that possibly they may have inhabited the earth? Augie?
Yeah, yes.
Hi.
This is going to be interesting because we're going to talk about some of the taboos in education and history here tonight. And we got a man here, Professor Adam Oliver Stokes. He's going to educate us on this. But first, a little bit about his background. He holds a degree from Duke University and Yale Divinity School in Religious and Biblical Studies. He understands several languages, including Hebrew, actually Old Hebrew, and Ancient Greek, Latin, and German. And he writes and lectures on ancient cultures and civilizations. With a special interest in ancient American civilizations and the giants of the Americas. You know, we had to get to the giants. And his work is published in many journals and publications around the world. And he is a featured guest on many podcasts and radio shows. And he has a book out. He's going to have to tell us about that. And he is here to tell us what's behind the curtain of ancient American history and the 9-foot to 22-foot tall giants that there are records of having been in the Americas in the past. So let's step back in time a little and learn some of the things the history books are not telling us. Welcome to the show, Professor Stokes.
Welcome.
Great to be here.
Oh, thank you.
I'm a longtime listener of the podcast, and I'm very much looking forward to this for a while.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Yeah. And I tell you, when we think about history a little bit. Charles Darwin is kind of the golden boy of the evolution, or the theory of evolution, but there's a disconnect somewhere. And you seem to be one of the very few that has the courage to step out there and say, wait a minute, there is more to this story than what's in the history books. Did that take a lot of courage?
Yes, well, I've always considered myself as an educator to be, my first priority is to look for the truth and to tell that truth to whoever I'm teaching, whoever I'm talking to. And I've always had an interest in ancient cultures, ancient civilization, going back to my childhood. And I used to read basically all the time. If you saw me as a kid in high school, I'd always have a book on me. And this just carried over, into my adult years. I knew from a very young age I wanted to be a teacher of some kind. I just kept reading and reading and reading. And I read Darwin's Origin of the Species. I read his Descent of Man. But like you said, the more I read, the more I learned. There seemed to be a disconnect between the standard understanding of evolution and how humankind developed and what we see basically in the record of human civilization. We have civilizations that go back way before Darwinian evolution says that human beings could have existed. We have fossils of human beings, fossils of things that they made that go back way before what conventional evolutionary theory suggests. So this got me kind of thinking, what is going on here? Is there an earlier civilization that's kind of undergirding everything? And if so, what can we learn about this civilization? And that led me kind of to kind of the proto-giant civilizations of the world, and then more specifically in my own interest, the American giants, who I think are very much connected, even though in the New World, I think they're very much connected to the Old World as well.
Wow.
Yeah, and do you feel like there is a cover-up or just plain ignorance? Which one of the two of them would you pick?
Oh boy.
That's an excellent question. I think there's kind of both. I think, evolutionary theory has been around, since the 1860s. So I think, especially for modern folk, millennials, they just don't know because they've been been taught the standard view, from secondary school. But I think that on the upper levels, amongst academia, amongst people who claim to be in the know, yes, heck yes, I think that there is a cover up because in a lot of ways, it's they don't want to challenge the traditional view. And there are a lot of implications, honestly, for challenging that traditional view, especially when you're talking about things like American giants and ancient American civilizations that predate Columbus's arrival to the New World, and kind of the significance of that in understanding the culture and the history of the native peoples who were here. And that's going to have severe implications for not just, evolutionary biology, but also anthropology, sociology, archaeology. The current model in archaeology now is the migration model, which says that the native peoples came here through the Bering Strait thousands of years ago, and basically kind of one of the implications of that is that they really didn't have that much of a culture. They were just hunter-gatherers. But when you talk about these giants and you look at their civilization and you look at these connections that seem to appear with the old world, then you have to take into consideration that there was kind of a vast empire here. And this supports kind of what's been looked down on in archaeological studies, the diffusionist model, that we have cultures from around the world going to different places and influencing each other.
Yeah, I am wondering though, the history books, they don't talk a lot about what's before. Of course, we remember that Columbus, he discovered America, but hello, there were natives here.
There are already people here. How can you discover something if they're already here? So not to knock Columbus's, he's a controversial figure. But in any case, whatever view you take of him, he's very important kind of for the development of Western civilization, but there was a whole civilization here before him, a very advanced civilization, in some ways much more advanced than the Europeans of his time.
So, was there a giant civilization that roamed the earth, or what do you think?
I definitely think so, and we can see kind of in the culture and the mythology of various peoples around the world that these giants, even though in some ways they're very different, in some ways even their appearance is different, they have similar attributes. So, for example, Irish mythology, you have a text. Zabian Hayes is another giant scholar. Looks at this text called "The Battles of Mag Tuired." I think I'm pronouncing that right. Forgive me if I'm not. Where you have this mother goddess, and you have this tradition that these giants in Ireland use their psychic ability, kind of like a druid ability, to build these massive structures. You have a similar tradition of giants using psychic ability for example, the Malta tradition of giants, which is hundreds of miles away. They used archaeologists in the 19th and even in the early 20th century were uncovering these massive architectural monuments that seem not to have been able to have been built by your average human being. Somebody or some group of people with special skill would have had to have built these. And we see the same thing, the same type of architectural feats that might have been done through some type of psychic connection with the giants of North America. So that's one connection there, and I think all those giants are related in that regard. But you also have just in the mythological traditions, the idea that these giants, that it pops up over and over again, that these giants really just aren't nice. They go around, they conquer and oppress whatever other civilizations are there. And in most of the traditions, except for the mother goddess that you get in Irish tradition, in most of these traditions, the British traditions, etc., even in Irish traditions with Gog Magog, these giants are just not very nice. So they seem to travel from place to place. They are physically superior and psychically superior to your average humans, and they seem to use this as a form of oppression to establish their own rule over people, and eventually people get sick and tired of this, and bye-bye giants.
Bye-bye giants, like, so with the slingshot, or how did they go away?
That's certainly how David did, Noel. So
Right.
that's so in the Bible, but for example, in North American tradition, you have with Native Americans, especially in the West, Nevada, California, etc. There's a tradition that there were cannibalistic giants who had an empire that ruled over them, and they were basically eating the Native Americans. The Native Americans got sick of this and rose up in revolt and drove them out. This is a tradition that spans the world. Whenever you talk about these giants, you have this depiction of them as just violent and cruel and bloodthirsty, and eventually the people that they're ruling over, rebel against them.
Yeah, and in fact, I know also that even Joseph Smith, when he went across the United States back, I think it was the early 1880s or something like that, or maybe earlier, he said also in his notes that he ran into giants in the Northwest.
Yeah.
So we know they have been there.
Yes.
Where did they go?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because the Native Americans in their traditions as well, they say, we weren't the first people here in the land. We got here and we were crossing the country and we ran into these giants, and our interactions with these giants weren't very good. And I think this is especially the case with kind of the Hopewell Adena Empire that you have in the Midwest and in the Great Lakes region. I think they either, and archaeologists and sociologists archaeologists and anthropologists debate about this, they either killed themselves off through civil war, or they were killed off by the people, the native people that they oppressed. So, but in any case, they were destroyed, whether self-destruction or destroyed by their enemies.
Yeah.
So ancestrally or
Yes.
DNA wise, are they just like a whole separate civilization that we did not descend from or have DNA links to? Or
That's a really good question. So I think a couple of things are going on here with this. So yes, I do think that when we talk about the giants, and specifically the empire of giants that went from the old world to the new, we're talking about a kind of a separate race from your average human being, your average Homo sapien. And Andrew Collins has done some work with this, and so has Greg Little on basically tracing the giants in America to the Denisovans, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, who were kind of another strata of a human being, different than the Homo sapiens, but basically a distinct race in and of themselves. So yes, I think that they were distinct, but at the same time, as you have even in the Bible with the stories of the Nephilim, they're interacting, they're interbreeding and intermarrying with your Homo sapien. And so even though the giants themselves, their empire is gone, not only do we have cultural remnants of them in kind of the mounds and the architecture that they built, but we also have kind of their blood, I think, in some of the cultures. So you have tall people, in Africa and Ireland, in Native America. You have, in fact, the tallest people in the world in Native America, not Africa, but Native America. And I think that comes directly from the giants. This also makes me think of, I was talking to Age before this about the Roman emperor who ruled in the 3rd century CE. I'm blanking. Thrax, I believe, was his name.
Yeah, Maximus Thrax, yeah.
Maximus Thrax, yes. And it's interesting. The descriptions of him are fascinating because not only is he in contemporary sources said to be taller than everyone else, but his features are different than the people around him. Now, he doesn't. Now, we know from contemporary sources that he was not part of the patricians, the Italian patricians, so he's not part of that that royal blood. He's actually, they consider him, contemporary writings made fun of him, they called him a barbarian, and he had, his facial features were kind of like a Cro-Magnon type of man. So I mentioned that there because that seems to be evidence, I think a really good example of evidence that these giants were a distinct race of humanoid, distinct from Homo sapiens.
And when I was doing a little bit of homework before the show, I did notice like some archaeological digs where they had giant skulls, and whether they're real or not, I don't know. But did their teeth? Would you even know? I mean, this may be so out there. Did their teeth support cannibalism, or?
It depends. So we have varieties of giants. So some of them, some of the giants that were, especially in North America, excavated, they were just very tall individuals, but in their bone structure similar to what you get with Homo sapiens. Others had more kind of elongated skulls. The Malta giants, for example, had elongated skulls, almost kind of alien. I don't necessarily believe the giants were alien, but kind of alien in shape, just to give you an example of that. And then you do have some giants, and there's a group of red-haired giants in Nevada and in the Midwest that seem to have had pronounced teeth. Teeth not like human beings, but more like canines, which would facilitate, tearing into really tearing into flesh, not just your average, chicken or beefsteak, but really tearing into real flesh and eating it. So yes, there seems to be some giants basically in their biological structure had the ability to probably be cannibals, to probably eat us. Yes.
Some of the skeletons that has been found and the skulls that was attached to that, they show that some of these really tall people in the Northwest, they had actually two rows of teeth, one behind the other one.
Wow.
Yeah.
And speaking of tall here, Maximus Trax, the Roman emperor, we don't really know how tall he was, but I think he was at least 9 foot long because his bed is part of the surviving Roman records, and that bed was 13 feet long.
Yeah, which is extraordinary for that time.
Yeah.
I actually, years ago when I was at Duke, I did some archaeological cataloging for biblical sites related to the Bible. And there's a guy in the Apocrypha named Tobias, and we're not sure if this is the same guy, but clearly that name was very well renowned. And I had to actually catalog his bedpost. And his bed turned out to be very, very small. So most beds in the ancient world are much smaller than today's beds. If you look at Monticello, for example, the place where Thomas Jefferson had his plantation, his bed is only about 5 feet or so. So people were pretty much smaller back then. So to have a 13-foot bed, that means, like you said, Age, this is a person of enormous stature.
Wow.
Yeah, and I know that's just not here either. Back in Norway, I had kind of a little museum back there on the farm, and one of the beds that we had actually was gold painted, and that was only just a little bit over 5 foot long also, and that was from the early 1700s.
Yep. So yeah, and the Thomas Jefferson bed again. I mentioned at Monticello, that was late 1700s, and yeah, it's only like 5 feet. I was like, if I get in this bed, my feet, even I'm 5'4", my feet are going to be hanging out of this. I'm not going to be comfortable at all.
Yeah.
So we have 2 minutes to break, and I'm not sure if this will give you enough time to answer a question. Margaret in the chat room asks, were some of the giants created?
Yes, that's an excellent question. So in some traditions, we do seem to get that. So in the biblical tradition, for example, in Genesis chapter 6, there are the Nephilim who come down, literally the fallen ones, who, wherever they've fallen from, wherever they've come from, they interbreed with the Benot Ha-Adam, the daughters of men, and they have what are known as the heroes of old. What the Hebrew text calls Ish Hashem, men of the name. And a Jewish scribe, Josephus, who's actually very important for biblical studies, he links these guys directly with the Greek gods and the Greek heroes of Greco-Roman lore. So he links them directly with Hercules and stuff like that. So in that case, these kind of semi-giant people would have been deliberately created by the Nephilim, or whoever these giant people are in Genesis chapter 6. That's a great question.
This is fascinating, and let's pick this back up on the other side of the break. We have just maybe 30 seconds to break, and I love this conversation. We'll be back shortly.
This is the Broadcast Team Alpha Show, hosted by Nori Love and Augie Nost. The one show that takes your doubts of the unknown and spins them into reality. Share your thoughts by calling our hotline number at 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230.
Call now.
Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio. More cutting-edge conversation and exploration of the quantum universe after this.
Welcome to the party, pal.
Hi, this is Dr. Sam Muggsy.
And Kent Dunn of the Quantum Shift Show.
Merry
Yes, Christmas, that's exactly it. You rascally wabbit you. I'll tell you.
I'm an idiot. You're an idiot.
Y'all happy Yuletide to all you all out there for the Yuletide season, and we'll be looking forward to seeing y'all for 2020.
Go to the cools, we get together, have a few laughs.
Don't forget the new year. Merry Christmas.
Toxins are everywhere, from the air we breathe to the food we eat and the water we drink. In a world where 80,000 known toxins and heavy metals threaten our very existence, how are you going to protect yourself and your loved ones? Introducing Pure Body Extra Strength, the world's first colloidal zeolite that helps trap and remove toxins as well as heavy metals from your body that are messing with your memory, clarity, sleep, and focus. Don't just take our word for it or the testimonials from our thousands of happy customers. Check out the hundreds of articles and case studies on the National Institute of Health website proving zeolite's powerful ability to remove toxins. For a limited time, listeners to KCOR will receive 10% off their first order. To get started, go to trypurebody.com and enter promo code RADIO10. Again, that's trypurebody.com. Toxic junk is all around us, but now you can take back control of your health and protect yourself by detoxing with Pure Body Extra Strength. You'll be on your way to sleeping better, thinking more clearly, and feeling more energetic. Go to trypurebody.com right now and get started today.
It's great. I think it's great. It's great.
The all-new KCOR Digital Radio Network.
Great. Please make a note of it. It's great.
Are you ready? Ready to go inside the Matrix? Inside the Matrix.
You see, whoever controls technology controls the world.
Then tune in Sundays at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, as your host, Jimmy Brent, takes you deep inside the holographic Matrix.
Carefully designed to stimulate the mind.
Come explore a world of topics from technology, archaeology, spirituality, and so much more. Inside the Matrix will liberate you from the manipulated, parasitic entities of consciousness.
You guys ready for this?
It's time to claim your true natures as creative, divine beings inside the Matrix. Hosted by Jimmy Brent.
Who are we talking about?
Jimmy Brent. Live Sundays at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern. Exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. Inside the Matrix. Investigating and analyzing the experience of life. 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 Life.
Going live.
Come explore the quantum possibilities. This is Broadcast Team Alpha.
Broadcast Team Alpha.
To be on the show live, call 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio. Share your thoughts of the show on Twitter at KCOR Radio, #KCOR. Or join the cutting edge conversation live in our chat room at KCORradio.com. Now back to Broadcast Team Alpha with your free thinking hosts, Nori Love and Augie Nast.
And I just want to do a shout out to the chat room. There's a lot of beautiful, brilliant beings in there. Big shout out to everybody. And before we went to the break, the word Nephilim came up. And my question during the break that we decided to hold on was, do the giants have something to do with angels?
That's a great question, Nori. So there has been a long-standing, ever since people became interested in, these giants, the skeletal remains that were found, and basically just the tradition of giants that you get in mythology. That has been a big question, and scholars like Zachariah Stitchin and Eric von Daniken have made a connection between the giants and the Anunnaki and Sumerian text and Near Eastern text. And for Stitchin, these were beings that came to Earth from another planet. Now, I'm a big admirer of Stitchin. I've read all of his works. I've read several of them dozens of times. And I myself am I'm a proponent of ancient astronaut theory. But in this case, I think with the American giants, we don't necessarily have to look for an extraterrestrial source for them. The term that Stitchin, for example, picks up on in his writings is with the Nephilim, which comes from the Hebrew term Nephal, which means fallen. And so he assumed that these were, alien beings who crash landed on this planet, and this is what the Sumerian tradition comes from. But I think in the case of the North American giants, when you're talking about, even in the Bible, I should say, when you're using the term Nephal or Nephilim, it doesn't have to necessarily be a theological term. A lot of times in the Bible, the term Nephal is used to refer to civilizations or groups of people who have basically fallen. The heyday of their civilization is over. So we might think, to use a modern example, semi-modern example, the fall of the Confederacy during the Civil War, or to use an ancient example, the fall of the Roman Empire. And I think that's how the term Nephal is being used in the Hebrew Bible. We have this race of giants who have, through their own violence, as the Genesis 6, the Noah narrative suggests, have fallen through their own pride, through their own violence, and they've fallen, and their civilization is not as great as it used to be. So I don't want to rule out Stitchin's understanding of the giants as fallen angels, because I think he has a lot of great stuff there. But my point is that we don't necessarily have to interpret it that way. Nephal, especially in the Bible, can refer to a fallen civilization. In fact, when Jerusalem is destroyed by the Babylonians, it taught the first thing that's mentioned in the Book of Lamentations is how Lady Zion, or the city of Jerusalem, has fallen, Nafla in the Hebrew. So there's another way of looking at it. So it could be fallen angels, as Stitchin argues, but it could also just refer to just a fallen civilization whose peak, whose glory basically has passed, which means, which raises the question, where did the giants come from? Where does the civilization come from? And I'm not sure that we entirely know their source civilization. We could, if I was to speculate, if I had to throw out a name, if you forced me to throw out a name, I'd say maybe Atlantis. But we're not really sure.
Wow.
I think we have to realize that just because they're tall doesn't mean they have to come from the same place.
Yes.
So I think the people that actually would have the answer is the Smithsonian, because they have been on site whenever there is a tall skeleton found anywhere in the world, pretty much. They have been on site demanding to have it so they can take it home and display it to the world, is what the people are told. And then they take it and it disappears.
You don't see it ever again. Yep.
No,
yep, exactly.
They have found to be destroying hundreds and hundreds of tall skeletons. Yeah. In fact, as I think it was about 2 years ago, they got sued by somebody that didn't get some of the information about giants from the Smithsonian. And they took it all the way through the court system. And a few months ago, the Smithsonian lost and now have to release the information. If you ask for information about giants, they have to release it to you.
I didn't know that till you told me. So they're going to get a letter or email from me very, very shortly.
Yeah.
So Margaret in the chat room asks, what do you think about Cyclops? Do you think that could have been the giant in the Bible?
Yes. So it's interesting because the Cyclopses in Greco-Roman myth are some of my favorite characters. I actually had my students read a short story in Latin. I'm a Latin teacher. That's my main profession. And I also teach theology at St. Joe's. But I had them read the story of Polyphemus from Ulysses, from the story of Ulysses, or the Odyssey. So, and in there, the Cyclopses, this Polyphemus, as you know, for anyone who's read the Odyssey, who's had to read it, not a nice person. Ulysses and his men just come onto the shore. They're starving. They want to take some food. The Cyclops gets ticked off and starts to eat them. And so to get out of the situation, they blind the Cyclops. I definitely think, and this is something that hasn't been looked at as much, we like to talk about, the pagan or polytheistic Rome and Greece versus, the Judeo-Christian culture. But I think there's a lot more similarities and a lot more deliberate parallels than people have given credit for. I think that, Josephus, the ancient writer I mentioned before, was spot on when he equated, a lot of these figures that you get in the Bible with Greco-Roman figures. And we know for a fact that within ancient Judaism, there were some Greek and Roman gods they equated with their god, Elohim or Adonai, and vice versa. The Greeks had names for the Greeks and the Romans had names for the Hebrew god, and I think that that applies even to various characters in the Bible. So I think the same giants that are mentioned in the Bible throughout, we talk about Goliath, but Goliath, in comparison to some of these giants, and Age noted this as well, Goliath is small. He's like a baby giant compared to some of these other giants, and some of these other giants match proportions of what you get with Polyphemus and the Cyclopses who are described in the Odyssey and in Ovid and in Hesiod. So I think that there's a direct connection there. I think that the giants of Greco-Roman lore are likely the same giants that you get in the biblical witness. But in the biblical witness, it just talks about the sons of Gath, the children of Gath, the children of this tribe, the children of that tribe, and they don't go into too much specifics. But if we had other texts, we actually do have other texts like the book of Jasher, and the like, whom, as when I was talking to Age a few weeks ago, we were talking about the biblical canon. These books didn't make it into the canon, but these books, the Sibylline Oracles, for example, make direct connections between the biblical giants and the giants of Greco-Roman culture. But those books didn't make it into our official Bible.
So what kind of proportions are we really talking about? What with the big giants you're talking of?
Oh, these guys are huge. We're talking about 12 to 13 feet. There was even... as you guys noted, and Richard Dewhurst notes this as well in his discussion of American giants, we have giants up to 22 feet long. So these are enormous beings. And you can see how for your average human being, you see a bunch of these guys who are like 13 to 22 feet, you're going to be scared crazy. And you're going to easily submit to these guys, So, yeah, you guys are the masters. Take it over. So, yeah.
Wow.
Boy, oh boy. Yeah, I know I've seen not a complete skeleton, but at least a femur bone of a human that is, if you added the proportions to that femur bone, that person had to be around 132 feet.
There was recently a documentary where somebody else found a femur bone, but this was in South America, and in a lot of the places you mentioned with the Smithsonian taking these things and them suddenly disappearing, you have to go to a lot of like private museums. South America has some really great private museums where you will actually find some of this material. You won't find a whole skeleton, but you'll find, like you said, a skull or a bone here. And like you said, if you do the math and you do the proportions, these were very, very tall beings.
If, just pretend, if there were any giants holed up somewhere on the planet, where do you think they might be?
That's a really good question. I think, so we have in North America these cities that date pre-Columbian era, which seem to be almost inside the earth. So like the Grand Canyon, and I have a couple of archaeological friends who've talked about this as well. There is a rich tradition, and nobody ever mentions this. They never mention this at all. But there is a tradition of cities being built inside the Grand Canyon, inside these mountains, as kind of hideaways, so that people, won't detect, won't find the persons living in these cities. Now, some people, some of the more extreme theories say, talk about, the inner earth, the hollow earth, which I do think has some validity as well. I think a couple things might be going on here that, the giants, if they were to retreat, they might have built like a secret city within the Midwestern mountains, within the western mountain regions, the canyons that nobody can get to. Certainly, there are traditions about that. People have claimed to have, at least in the 19th century, claimed to have found these cities within the Grand Canyon. There was a dude a couple years back who was trying to do an excavation for it, and for some reason ran into a crap load of red tape when he tried to do it. Personally, the government shut him down and said, "No, you're not gonna." You're not going to explore. He's like, I have this tradition. I think, based on these Native American traditions, based on the traditions of European settlers, I can track down where these cities might be, and the government just like shut him down. They were like, no.
Big shocker there.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
he was going to do it, and I think it would have been like a very, very fruitful expedition. So I'm thinking if the Giants went anywhere, they're probably in that area, or they might be in what people refer to as the inner Earth.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have to give props because somebody, and I can't scroll back, but some brilliant being in the chat room in the beginning of the show made reference to the Grand Canyon. So, yeah, very cool, very cool.
Yeah, and these mounds that we see all over the place. We have mounds to the Midwest in the United States and Chicago area, all the way down to the southern border just about, and all over Europe. In fact, in Norway, on my old farm back in Norway, we had a grave mound, and everybody thinks it's just a Viking that was buried in it, and it probably was. But some of these mounds are a little bigger than others, and I know I was told that there was one over in Norway, a rather big mound, that they did ground penetrating radar, and they found that there was a skeleton in it. Yes, but that skeleton was 9, 10, or I forget what it was now, 10 feet or so tall. So there's something goofy going on there too.
Yes.
Speaking of goofy, I mean, not for nothing, Augie, but you're not exactly short. Is there something we need to know?
You descend from those Norway giants, Aggie?
I remain silent.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I think, I think there's a definite connection between, the mounds in Norway and the type of mounds you get in North America. So you have mounds aligned with constellations, and buried in the mounds are these skeletons of giants. You have the exact same phenomenon in North America, and I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that's direct evidence of diffusion right there.
And a lot of the mounds in the Midwest had been dug out, and they found giants in them.
Yeah, they were finding them, and throughout the 19th century, they were finding them all over, and people were saying, what do we do with these? They contact the Smithsonian. They'd send them to the Smithsonian would come out, or they'd send them to the Smithsonian, and they disappear. And I think, again, a lot of that was, deliberate cover-up. Why? Because of the implications of this. So, I mean, the implications being that there's this whole civilization that existed pre-Columbian in pre-Columbian America, and if that civilization exists, then when you're interacting with Native Americans, as is happening a lot in the 19th century, and they're trying to get land from the Native Americans, you have to treat the Native people as equals to yourself, because they have a civilization that is just as high and just as great as you. So if you're trying to get their land, you don't want to do that. So what do? You suppress this information. And I think at this point, I think that's less of an agenda now. At this point, going back to our earlier conversation about evolutionary theory, I just think too much is at stake now. If you talk about giants and earlier species of humans that kind of throw the evolutionary model on its head, it's going to mess up too many things in academia and in the study of biology, etc. So there's still that suppression there, but for different reasons.
I think the education system doesn't want to be proven to be wrong, because then people will ask, wait a minute, they were wrong about that. what else are they wrong about?
Exactly. And people will start thinking for themselves. Yes.
We've got so many boats rocking all over the world. I imagine they just don't even want to rock that boat right now. So
that's true. Not a good time. Not a
oh
good
my
time to worry.
goodness, this is amazing.
Mm-hmm. Now, you were talking about ancient history also, and let me bring up the Mayan calendar. According to the Mayan calendar, the end of the world was going to be in, what was it, December 22, 2012?
2012,
and,
yeah.
you didn't go out and sell your house and give all your money away because it was the end of the world, did you? Or
No.
there were actually people doing that.
Yes. Well, here's the interesting thing. People hear of end of the world and, they think it's going to be like the apocalypse and the Walking Dead and zombies and stuff like that. In religious terminology, in spiritual terminology, the end of the world, and I talk about this when I teach my Old Testament class, because when you read the Hebrew prophets and they talk about the end of the world, it's not like everybody's going to die and everything. It's just a transition from one type of world to a better type of world. So when they talk about the end of the world, it's not like, just basically everything's going to be obliterated, but it's just a transition, a moral, a spiritual transition from one type of world to another type of world. I still think, I very much believe that the ancients were way ahead of us in a lot of things. I think the Maya were ahead of us in a lot of things. And I think they got the 2012 thing right. But, it remains to be seen, what does that mean when they said the end of the world? So does 2012 mark a new period in human development? We shall see. I think so. But
I think it was maybe just a beginning of something, maybe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Adam, with all of the vast, studying and knowledge and what you know and what you're not saying, what do you make of this transition time or this awakening time that we're going through? What's your take on it?
I think that there is definitely, as Aki said, a beginning of something special, and I think that's being facilitated by just the amazing technology that we have now. People, if you wanted to get information back in the day, you had to, go through so many kind of loopholes. You had to be kind of in the inside group. You had to, go to libraries all over the world and stuff like that. And not to put that down or anything. I love libraries. I could stay in libraries all day. I've been to libraries all over the world, from Heidelberg to California.
Wow.
But people basically, if you want information, if you want to uncover the truth, this is kind of the greatest time in history to do that. I think about the ancient Romans. I was reading one of my favorite books the other day, Gore Vidal's Julian, and how to really get to the history of Rome. If you're a Roman and you want to know about Roman history or get Roman records, you had to go to the archives. You had to know somebody special within the archives, within the imperial government, to even get a glimpse of that information. But you don't have to do that anymore. This information, and I think you guys are some of the key figures in that. You guys are, bringing this information out, and people are being able to basically being enlightened now in a way that they haven't been before. And I think, shows like this, work like this is really facilitating kind of a beginning of people, starting to really, of humanity starting to really understand the truth about its past and the truth about its future and where it's going to go.
And easy for me to say. We only have 4 minutes left, but really quickly, I'm noticing that as a nurse, some of the information that I had access to, medical information, I can't find it anymore on the internet. So I think we had that open book, right, that was the internet, and now I feel like the book is being shut. But the beautiful thing that is so empowering right now is that we're coming together in communities and we're sharing information, right, the way that it has been shared, you know, in conversation and in dialogue. And I'm just so grateful for that. So grateful that you're here with us, Adam. Thank you.
My
Yeah.
pleasure.
Now we got only 3 minutes left of the show, so let the people know where they can get a hold of you. And you had a book. I forgot about that. Let us know about your book also.
Yes. I have a book out. It's called Perspectives on the Old Testament. It's an academic textbook. No giants in there, but I do talk a lot about ancient civilization, and there's a whole chapter devoted to kind of the Noah flood story and its relation to, you know, Sumerian and Near Eastern myths. In that book, it's published by Cognella Press, and it used to be kind of expensive. It's discounted to like $50 now on Amazon or Barnes and Noble. I'm also working on a book specifically about giants from Egypt to Ohio. I'm putting some final touches on that book, editing it, and trying to shop it around to different people, inner traditions, New Page Books. Might self-publish it, but I'm going to see how that goes. I can be found on Facebook, and I also have an Instagram account called Adam the Giant Guy 2019, and it has basically the work that I've done in magazines such as Ancient American and other ancient history magazines. It's
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much. And actually, I'm going to get your book. I know it's a textbook, but it sounds amazing. And we have 1 minute before we close. So I just want to properly thank you and would love to have you on again. This was so fascinating. And I love the way that you explain the information. You just make it really user-friendly. So thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here.
Thanks, Augie. See you next week.
Okay, we will be back.
All right, friends in the chat room. See you next week. Thanks for being here. What a great group.
Thank you and good night.
You've been listening to Broadcast Team Alpha.
Broadcast Team Alpha.
Hosted by Nori Love and Augie Nost. Every Tuesday night at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. The balance of power is shifting to a new paradigm. Will you be ready? For more information on Broadcast Team Alpha, as well as the hosts Nori Love and Augie Nost, please visit their website at broadcastteamalpha.com. Until next week, remember to keep those minds open while always exploring the endless quantum possibilities.
Broadcast Team Alpha. Over and out.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcasting from a shack just south of Area 51.
Wait, that doesn't exist.